So you built a dice tower. You want to tell me about it?
Oh yeah. Well, I used to do this all the time and I forgot about it. But what you do is you take a phone box and you cut it up and then you just cut a hole in the top,
Hmm.
right? And
You're
then on
helpfully
the
showing me, but our listeners won't be able to see that. We should put a picture on Instagram or something.
yeah, and so then you take like the inserts from the phone box
Hmm.
and they're typically done in such a way that you have enough cardboard to cut some little ramps, and you see the ramp inside there. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Hmm.
But there's one, two, so it goes, there's a ramp here and a ramp here, and then a ramp here that angles outward, like it slants, so it rolls out. And then there's also another ramp on the other opposing side. And then you just put the box inside the box like that.
Do you have a
And
document that details how to make that?
no, I just made it up.
Because if you documented it, we could put that as like a Patreon reward.
Yeah, I could do
It's just
that.
like post it on Patreon
Um,
and make your own dice tower out of a phone box.
that would have been more prudent to do before I made it. So
Because
I
now you
could.
don't remember exactly what you did.
No, but I would have to rip it apart to take pictures of what I did.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I just used crazy glue and this I made this entire thing with just the parts of the packaging for my old Motorola phone that I remembered I had. And the cool thing about it too is then you can literally just put all your dice in here like this, and
Hmm.
then you close it up and carry your dice in it. So but yeah, when I
What?
was working as an IT tech, I had like all these boxes from
Hmm.
all the iPhones we gave to people and iPads too. I made iPad this tower, and I realized that I gave all of them away, and I didn't keep any for myself.
You're so generous.
Yeah, stupid or generous or whatever, however you want to phrase it.
Welcome to Your Aleatoric Reality, the podcast that comes up with cool crafts that we don't know how to tell you how to do.
I got I had some forms made.
Forms.
Yeah, yeah. I was using, well, we can get into that if we ever do the dice making episode. But yeah, I made these really clean molds that I just pulled out. It looked great.
Nice.
Very sexy.
All right. Well, one thing that we should do that we've been forgetting to do that we said we would do is roll for whether this is the end of season one.
Right?
I think we first said that in episode 11,
Yeah, yeah, was it?
and this is now episode 18, and I think we rolled twice for
Right.
whether it's the end of the. What odds do you want to give it?
Um,
One out of six, two out of six,
yeah, just do 1 out of 6.
three out of
I
10.
got a dice 6 here. So what's the
Roll.
number? What's the number?
I would say if you roll a one, it's the end of season one.
2.
All right, we're still rocking and rolling, man.
That's the other thing too, is like, let me see if I can get it. It's an even more satisfying dice roll sound. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I can. Barely.
Yeah.
Hopefully, our listeners can hear it.
It's a Zoom.
We're doing remote again because I happen to be in Omaha, Nebraska for work. So Damon and I are on a Zoom meeting.
Dreams really do come true, man.
They do. I've always
Finally.
wanted to go to Nebraska. Well, it is a new state on my visited states map. I haven't been to Nebraska before.
You should buy some life insurance.
I'm thinking about it. I have a listener email,
Oh.
and I really feel like I need to say who it's from. It's from Scott from Pennsylvania,
Oh, weird.
the instigator of Joe versus the volcano. I think that he maybe got a little jealous that Kat was getting so much attention on the podcast.
Did he start his own 90s theme podcast as a rebuttal?
He should. That would be he does like alternative rock, I think. So anyhow, Scott writes, "Greetings, reality benders. I wanted to tell you about my new aleatoric reality inspired micro workout plan, which I'm all about because it gets us out of the restaurant and ordering off a menu rut.
Mm-hmm.
Scott says, I have been working on injecting more movement into my day to shake up my sedentary desk job and was studying up on micro workouts. Micro workouts are short workouts. Mine are 2 to 5 minutes that are scattered throughout the workday. I found a random reminder app that will allow you to set a range of time and a frequency of reminders. So he has an app that will just like randomly tell him, hey, do something.
Mm.
And then he says, I am pairing it with a list of exercises I can roll to select. I am working on a card deck of exercises I can randomly choose from. That's
Oh,
pretty cool.
interesting.
He also says, today is Kat's birthday. This was a couple days ago. Today is Kat's birthday, and I am suggesting a random restaurant selection. Hail Fortuna. That is from Scott from Pennsylvania, who has been mentioned on probably every other podcast we've done episode, right? And if there's other listeners that are getting tired of me talking about Scott and Kat, then send us your own damn email and we can talk about you instead.
There we go.
But Scott, I spoke to Kat on her birthday, which is also their anniversary. They got married on her birthday, and I'm actually performed their wedding, which is not relevant to anything. I'm just bragging. But they did, and I talked to Kat, and she said that she did put the choice of restaurant in Scott's hand. And he said in this email that he was doing it randomly. So I got a text from her later in the day with a picture of Scott with some curry. And she
Mm,
says a roll of six-sided die sent us to Indian food. And the name of the restaurant is Cumin and Eat, or like come in and eat,
I
but
get it.
cumin the
Yeah,
spice, cumin and eat.
that's lovely.
Pretty cute. So I'll ask Scott for permission to post that picture. And if he says no, then you're just gonna have to imagine it, dear listener. Uh, so there we have it. There's our listener email for the week.
Cool.
So in the news segment, I want to. So I did not do my homework. I did not watch that thing you do yet. I just haven't had the time.
Same.
But you apparently have something to report on the homework front.
I did. I watched versus the Volcano yesterday.
And I want to talk about it now because I want to put Tom Hanks to bed and never mention him again on this this podcast.
I don't think it's possible. I think it's more of a Tom Hanks podcast at this point.
Welcome to Your Aleatoric Reality, the
Your
podcast
Tom
that
Hanks
only
reality.
discusses Tom Hanks and his body of works. So what did you think of Joe versus the Volcano?
I think I didn't really dig it that much. I
Okay.
think it would have been better had it been done in a more of like an indie film style instead of like a Spielberg style.
Mm,
Because I think had it been done, I don't know, had it been done more like less campy and less high budget, I think it would have been a better movie.
less campy and less high budget.
Yeah. Like they were trying to do, especially like the opening shot where they're showing the factory where who knows what he even did there. It was gross. Yeah, it was like all medical supplies and yeah. But it was
Yeah.
like they were trying really hard to have this dystopian vibe, but the
Hmm.
palette was like super bright and like not dystopian. So like even like the grays were popping. So
Yeah.
it just kind of, I think it would have been better if it would have done more artfully, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Steven Spielbergian style. I don't know if you looked it up, but Steven Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy executive produced it.
There you go.
So they probably had some input on that. And directed by John Patrick Shanley, who I'm not too familiar with as a director,
Mm-mm.
but he did Moonstruck, Alive, the cannibalism in
Mm-hmm.
the South American Mountains movie. It's the only ones of his I've seen.
I mean, I don't know. It was surprised. Like there was so like even Nathan Lane was kind of boring. Like whoever
Yeah.
directed that was not. They didn't. I mean, I just think it could have been done a lot better. Like all the pieces were there, but the
Hmm.
delivery was, and I like the mystical trunks. Like that was cool.
Hmm.
But I mean, overall, I think it had more potential than it gave itself.
Yeah, well, I think when I said that I changed my mind and I really liked it, I'm really talking about the writing
Mm-hmm.
and the allegory and the imagery, like the kind of like conceptual imagery of it, as opposed to the actual
Mm-hmm.
production and cinematography and that sort. I agree with you on that. It's a little simultaneously campy but overproduced, you know.
Exactly.
And I
It's
also
like let's
think
look.
what's that?
I was like, let's look low budget, but they didn't. Like it
Right.
just didn't work. And yeah, I mean, there was a lot of things I liked about it, and I went into it wanting to like it.
Hmm.
I especially liked the kind of dialogue between him and the driver he hires,
Hmm.
and I kind of wish they would have taken that a little further. I could have done without the middle Meg Ryan.
Uh, well, I mean, the first Meg Ryan was the life he was leaving behind. The second Meg Ryan was he was being tempted. Now I have an unlimited credit card. I could just lose myself in escapism, you
Hmm.
know. I think she had her place. But my
Yeah.
biggest problem still, and when I first saw it at age 19, I went into this thinking he better actually jump in that volcano or I'm gonna be pissed. They're gonna cop out and like make him, get out of it somehow. And then when I watched it, fully, a couple weeks
Hmm.
ago, I still had the same kind of thing in the back of my mind. I'm like, I know they're going to get him out of it somehow. I'm really going to be disappointed if he doesn't actually jump in the volcano. And of course, well, spoiler alert, if you don't want to know how the movie ends, skip ahead, because I'm going to say it right now, because they have it both ways, right?
Hmm.
He jumps in and he gets out of it,
Right.
which was kind of ridiculous. Well, I mean, it's not like 'cause that's one of the things that underscores that this is not a regular narrative, it's an allegory,
Hmm.
you know, because clearly that is
Well,
not believable.
but also like they didn't spend any time on the tribe. Like there was a fertile ground there that was just left untouched.
Yeah.
Like they touched on that all the tribesmen were addicted to this weird cola that they had or whatever, and then like nobody wanted to jump in the volcano, but they didn't really get into it. They spent more time on the trunks out to sea than they did on like the whole premise, like the important part of the movie. It was just the pacing
Yeah,
was very off.
one thing I did like about The Tribe, though, and this is very unusual for it being a 1990 movie, The Tribe was weirdly like non-exploitative in any way. They said like it was like a mixture of like, some of the like native Pacific Islanders mixed with people from the Roman Empire, mixed with like
Right.
a Jewish expedition. It was like, let's just make that not be a thing. We're not going to worry about what exact nationality or culture is this. Let's just make it this ridiculous combination of things so we can get away with it, basically.
Well, but also it was a little tone deaf in the fact, at least from today's perspective. I mean, there was blackface, like Nathan Lane and Ava
Well,
Goda. Well, it's not
it wasn't
blackface. It was like,
blackface. It was they did have skin tone changes through makeup. Yes, that was
yeah.
a little outrageous. But again, 1990. I think for the time they did a pretty good job with it by
Hmm.
having it be like, not a real culture that exists on Earth, just a made up one that's a mix of European and Pacific and whatever.
Hmm.
So there's certain things that they did forward thinking, I think, with the
Yeah,
tribe.
but like I don't know. I was just underwhelmed with Ava Goda in general because I thought that could have. First of all, he's a lot funnier than that, and it just felt like they didn't give him much to work with. They're like, yeah, you're the chief, and your island is gonna die, and you just kind of don't give a fuck.
Right. Yeah, he did. He was not at all invested in the outcome of anything.
No, it's like, do you guys want to be married? Okay. Do you want to be married? Yes. Do you want to be married? Okay. You're married. Like it was just dumb.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I'm sure Scott will disagree with you, but overall, I enjoyed it the second time around.
Yeah. I mean, it's too bad now we can't have like a David Lynch remake.
I know, right?
Yeah,
Well, David Lynch doesn't do remakes.
true. Well,
Well, he
except
doesn't do anything now, but he
yeah.
never did a remake.
I mean, he kind of did with Twin Peaks, but
Are you saying Fire Walk with Me was a remake of the series? Oh, it was a
no, it wasn't
prequel.
a remake, but it was a weird, I don't know. That it felt like a cash grab. It's like, I don't know, like the Bowie cameos and the Kiefer Sutherland cameos, and like
Hmm.
it just felt like a money rake, and he's like, "Hey, oh yeah, got to show Laura Palmer's boobs. All right, now we're set."
Well, we can talk about that more if we roll for review.
Okay.
So let's roll for a topic. I got six topics here.
Okay.
You want to go ahead and roll a sixer?
3.
Three is dice making.
Oh,
You ready
okay.
to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about that.
Cool. Well, Damon has been making dice we've mentioned before. What was the instigation to get into that project?
So, well, it was around the same time that we decided to do this podcast, and I thought it would be really cool to, it's been kind of a on my like unofficial list of things I want to do someday,
Uh-huh.
but I was looking for, I don't remember what I was looking for,
You were
but
looking for a class, weren't you?
well, no, I stumbled into, I don't remember why I was looking for a class. I don't remember why, but I found a dice making class and we talked
Uh-huh.
about it. We talked about going, and then I started looking into it and I'm like, I don't need a fucking class for this. This is easy, you
So what
know?
was the first step?
To watch like 5,000 YouTube videos. I mean,
Nice.
I just deep dived it, and started making a list of things to buy.
Hmm.
Supplies I needed to get started. And like I said, and went through a lot of forums but mostly it was just watching video after video after video after video after video and kind of figuring out because there's a lot of ways to skin this cat.
Hmm.
And But I ended up getting a little impatient and I bought just a pre-made dice mold.
Hmm.
And that was my first set. And it came out pretty well. I only made one set from that mold, but that was while I was so yeah, I decided I was gonna, because when I do things, I do them a little extreme.
You get into it.
Yeah. And I'm like, so I want to make a custom set of Yar branded dice.
Well, let's back up a second because the first one you bought a pre-made mold,
Uh-huh.
right? And then you have to pour the resin into that.
Yes.
And that's a two-part like epoxy resin.
Correct. Yeah, it's a one to
Okay.
one ratio, and you
And
mix
you
it.
mix it and then you pour it into the mold. Now, did you have the pressure chamber at this point?
I did. I did. Yeah,
Okay.
because after watching all these videos and reading all forum stuff and doing it without the pressure pot is a complete waste of time.
Okay. Good to
Because
know.
yeah, because it's there's a lot of techniques and tactics to get bubbles out
Hmm.
that just make it very arduous and way more time consuming and way more precise, and you still get half the time you get bubbles. And so just to explain briefly, you're mixing things together and air
Hmm.
gets stuck in there, and it's a oil to honey like consistency, viscosity of the epoxy, and then you're mixing in alcohol inks or dyes. You're mixing in mica powder, you're mixing in whatever to color them. And it's inevitable there's air in there, there's air bubbles in there. And then
Hmm.
what the pressure pot does is you put it under pressure, so you pump extra air into a sealed container to increase the air pressure, and that shrinks the bubbles. So the bubbles are all still there, but it shrinks them down to microscopic size, so you can't
Nice.
actually see them. And it just it makes 1,000% difference. And I've had a few like I had a pressure pot. I had a hose explode on me at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, after I'd already put the dice in and I was getting ready, and I start turning on the pressure, and the hose was just a junky, brittle old hose that I already had, and it just kind of
Hmm.
it literally exploded, and those dice came out with tons of air bubbles in them, and
Oh man.
I threw most of those away. But I mean, I always went into this with like, there's going to be a lot of trial and error.
Hmm.
Like this is an imprecise science. I mean, it's epoxy is not really meant, especially most of the epoxy, it's meant to make larger things,
Hmm.
like boats. or
Now
or
I'm curious, when you mix the resin, how long do you have to like put paint or glitter and stuff in it and pour it before it starts to get too hard to work with?
with the stuff that I use, it's about 35 to 40 minutes.
Oh, that's not so bad.
It was at first when I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
It was a very ticky clock. But now, actually, with some of the techniques I'm using, I have to wait until the resin is almost unusable, and then you pour it, and there's less potential for colors to mix together because
Gotcha.
they're already kind of congealed, I guess, for lack of a better term, or
Nice. Wow,
hardened.
that
Yeah.
sounds like you did a lot of research on that. So
Yeah.
after you did a set with the pre-made mold,
Well,
then you got into designing your own and making your own molds, right?
so what happened was I started making my own dice, designing my own dice, which is
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to do that, and I do not have a background in dealing with 3D like using a program like Blender, for example.
Is it like an AutoCAD kind of thing?
No, it's not. It's a 3D modeling software that's designed for artists, and
Oh, I see.
it's about as friendly as Photoshop.
Okay.
But I still to this day am a bit baffled by the way that the logic of it works. It
Hmm.
just feels like it's trying to do too much to me. But also, since I need to make perfect geometric shapes, it's not really designed for that. I mean, it is and it isn't, but there's
Hmm.
not, you can't, it's the approach of that program is like working with clay.
Uh-huh.
And I don't want to work with clay. I want to build an exactly precise thing.
So are there other tools that would do that easier?
Yeah, I dug around and I found there was what I settled on was an OpenCAD program, which is
Uh-huh.
there's a special library. Let me see if I can pull it up here real quick. That's exactly what it's called. Well, the first thing I used was Poly Dice Generator,
Uh-huh.
which is okay, and that is a library for OpenSCAD.
Oh,
And
is that like designs for dice and then you could modify them?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it got me halfway there, but it didn't get me. First of all, they didn't have all the dice I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And so what I ended up doing was kind of reverse engineering it, and I was adding dice to it. And then I actually, for the really weird ones, I ended up just going just into OpenSCAD and doing it by hand and just
Wow.
like coding the whole thing. Yeah. So I already had an idea of the framework, and it's using a library called BSOL. Which I don't remember what that stands for. But anyway, it's got most of the geometry built in there, like all the basic shapes. But when I started getting into seven-sided and nine-sided dice and five-sided die and the ones that nobody else bothered to model or were not standard uh polygon, like they're not standard geometric shapes. And
Right.
so I was able to learn enough about that tool to get pretty proficient with it. And the hardest part of it is once you make the shape that you want to put the numbers on.
Hmm.
Like that's actually the hardest part is like aligning and the making them children of the faces and then setting the depth and the geometry and rotating them and getting them all exactly how you want. It's extremely difficult. But I've gotten fairly good at it just through persistence and diligence, I guess. But so anyway, so I designed a set of dice and I was looking into getting a 3D printer and I was going to do that. And then I started reading about this whole degas problem. And the way that the 3D printers work, like home 3D printers,
Uh-huh.
there's a whole degas process that can literally take up to a year. And when you try to mold them in silicone, it creates all these problems.
Oh.
Yeah. And so
There's
like the
like teeny microscopic gas bubbles inside the what your printing material that takes like a year to get out.
the chemical reaction isn't finished and it's still releasing gas and you
It's
can
crazy.
yeah and like you can they're like okay now after you print it set it in a windowsill with a heavy sunlight for about 6 months. It's like
Oh
no
man.
no, I don't want to do that.
No, you
Like
don't.
I just spent all this money, which I didn't do, but I could have done. Dive down the whole rabbit hole of the process of 3D printing to begin with, which is not. It's better than it used to be, but it's still its own thing, right?
Hmm.
And so what I did was I just looked online. I found actually the Chinese place that I used to buy all my circuit boards from. I have them
Uh-huh.
made there. It was really cheap. There's no degas problem because they're using the higher grade printers.
Uh-huh.
And
There's a
so
different material that they're printing with.
right.
And
And
isn't
so
there a better resolution with the professional printing?
not necessarily. Not at this
Oh,
point.
okay.
At this point, not necessarily. So anyway, so I ordered those from China, and it's like they cost like 30 cents a die. but the shipping is $30.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, you want to really, and there's a max of 30 you can order at a time. So I hit that max really quick. And I ordered them. And while I was waiting them for those to show up, because it takes at least a week,
Hmm.
at least a week. That's when I got that mold and made a set. Just to kind of dip my toe in, I'd been reading all this stuff and I really wanted to get started, and I had everything except for the prototype dice.
So you actually did
Um,
your own designs first, but then it was while you were waiting for them to be produced, you went ahead and got a pre-made mold and did your first pour.
Correct.
Cool.
Yeah.
Because you're not
Yeah.
going to just sit on your bum for a week not doing this
Yeah.
awesome thing you decided to do. You're a go-getter, man.
Yeah, I try. But so then what you do is you have to come up with a form, right? So something to put the thing in to fill with silicone.
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of different ways to make molds.
You had
And
a
I've tried
unique solution.
well, I tried a lot of different solutions and I ended up going with kind of a hybrid. It depends on what I'm doing. If I'm doing just regular size dice, then I do what's called a squish mold, which is it basically there's a bottom and a top. The top has the numbers on it, right?
Hmm.
Just the ones or whatever is facing up.
Uh-huh.
So you put the dice in, you pour a mold, then you flip the mold over so that there's the exposed faces, which is typically the one. I always use the two because I have the Yar logo on the one,
Hmm.
and you want to go with something pretty simple, just in case,
Right.
right? And then you make a lid for it, and then you fill it with resin, and it's called a squish mold because then you just literally squish it down and hope for the best. But then for the larger dice, so what ends up happening is when all those microscopic bubbles we were talking about earlier, when they shrink, it can cause a vacuum
Uh-huh.
or a void, right? So the top of the die then doesn't have enough resin because all the resin has been compressed.
Uh-huh.
And that's not such a problem with small regular sized dice, but when you start getting into 30 millimeter, 40 millimeter, 50 millimeter,
Uh-huh.
60 millimeter, then it really becomes a problem. So you have to come up with a mold design that allows you to have a reservoir.
And that's like a little well on the top that can hold extra resin, right?
Correct. Right. So that when it does shrink, it gets filled.
And then that leaves a little nubbin there that you got to cut her off or sand off or something like that, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I've got things down to the point where I don't do a ton of sanding.
Mhm.
That's the hardest thing. So when you first get your masters, you have to sand the fuck out of them.
Uh-huh.
Um, but
Because they need to be real
any
smooth to make the mold. Yeah.
exactly. So whatever you start with is where you also start with on your final product. And I mean, there are depending on how the mold is set up and that the you can get some flashing or like little things, but it's pretty minimal. And with mine, I only have to sand typically just the top face and then the edges that meet the top face.
Mhm.
So, with it, which means like for a D6 or a D4 or anything lower, I'm sanding 5 out of 6 sides.
Right.
um, uh, and then the sanding ends up being a whole rabbit hole as well. But the process that I found that works, so you can either you do it the traditional way, which is to have finer and finer and finer and finer and finer grades of sandpaper,
Uh-huh.
or also with the stuff that's called Zona paper, which is like a fibrous sandpaper. So the way the fiber is exposed, it creates a grit.
Oh.
And then, yeah. And so it just looks like a little piece of cloth instead of like traditional sandpaper. And that works pretty good. And you can get up to like a 1 micron grit on that.
That
But
sounds
you
pretty
have to go,
smooth.
yeah, yeah. And that's really what you need to get to in order to have a glass like finish,
Yeah.
right? And so there was a long period where I went through and experimented with different ways of doing it. I'm like, I am not fucking sanding these dice this much. It's just not happening,
Uh-huh.
because when you have let's say your master is perfect, it's glass like, it looks wonderful, right?
Mhm.
And then you get some flashing. Well, you can't remove anything with the super fine micron paper,
Uh-huh.
whether it's sandpaper or the Zona paper. So you have to then go through all the steps, which is typically like 6 or 7 different sandings.
It's a lot of sanding.
Yeah. And I just don't want to. I mean, it's nice. I do it while I do my day job because I'll just sit in a meeting and I'll just sit here to sand dice.
Hmm.
I just tape the sandpaper to the table and just do it that way. I experimented with having a little pottery wheel
Uh-huh.
and taping the sandpaper to that, and then using that as like a power sander, but with a flat surface.
Uh-huh.
But it doesn't.
Doesn't work any
You
better.
lose you lose precision.
Mm.
I mean, it kind of works too good,
Ah, I see.
you know. Uh, I haven't given up on it, but anyway, then what I do is I only sand to at this point. I use 1,000 grit sandpaper to remove. So if there's, anything I need to, leftovers, like you were talking about the little sprue that you get,
Yeah.
or any flashing that happens or anything like that, I use 1,000 grit to remove. And then the next step up from that is 1,500 grit.
Hmm.
And after 1,500 grit, I stop sanding and I have a vibratory tumbler,
Hmm.
like you would use to the primary use, because like rock tumblers, like rolling
Uh-huh.
tumblers, are really great for rocks, but they're not very precise
Uh-huh.
because they kind of don't need to be,
Right.
you know. But
'Cause
the
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 final shape
vibratory.
doesn't really matter when you're tumbling gemstones.
Exactly. Um, and so I use a vibrator. I actually had one from. I used to shoot in competition forever ago, and I used to load my own rounds and had brass, and that's what it's mostly used for is brass polishing.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I use that. I killed it now actually, but it served its purpose for a while. But
So you have to get another one now?
I already got
Oh, okay,
one.
cool.
Yeah, and it's a higher capacity one too, which is good. But
Nice.
so anyway, you take the dice and you get these like 5 pounds of 3 millimeter ceramic balls. Okay,
Uh-huh.
and then you get car polish, like super ultra grade high powered car polish
Uh-huh.
they use to like shine up cars,
Uh-huh.
right? And
Race
you dump a
cars.
bunch of that in, yep, you dump a bunch of that in there and you let it just tumble like overnight.
Hmm.
Pretty much a minimum of like 16 hours is but I usually go 16 to 24 hours.
And that saves you from having to do 8 rounds of increasing sandpaper.
It gets it up to just under glass like, but the thing about I was going to say is the thing about glass like finish, it's great for photography. Roll it 3 times and tell me how it looks. I mean, it's just
Not
it's
gonna
not
stay that
sustainable.
way.
So right. So unless if you're not going to use these dice, if you want to put them in a lit case with mirrors and just gaze upon them in awe all the time, I'm not your guy.
Well, when I said you have a unique way to do the molds, what I meant was the
Uh,
structure that you build to pour the silicone into when you're making the mold.
oh,
Yeah, you
Legos.
built the
Yeah.
boxes out of Legos. I thought that was pretty cool. So that your mold will have a faint Lego brick wall pattern on the outside edges of it because that's what you poured it into.
Right. Well, I have actually I'm trying to get away from that because when I do that, I have to like tape the fuck out of it, like just cover it in packing
Mm,
tape because Legos aren't meant to be like
right.
watertight, right?
Right.
And so I actually just got some forms that I had made that are just it's just a cylinder with a slit in it.
Uh-huh.
So I just cover the slit and then use that. I used it for the first time with these, and these I think these came out great. I actually have a second iteration of the mold design where I got a little fancier with it, but and also I had to design a mold form to for the for tuna statues
Uh-huh.
because I didn't have anything that was going to work for
Did
that.
we talk about those already on the show?
No, I don't think we did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've come up with some 3D designs for a Fortuna statue that's got a little plaque at the bottom that says "Your Aleatoric Reality." Which I mean, truth be told, I just took the 3D model of the D2 that has and just kind of embedded it in the base. But I thought it looked pretty slick.
Yeah. I think they look great. What are you gonna do with
Yeah.
those?
Well, I'm gonna put it on my dashboard.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, like a little Jesus kind of thing.
That sounds real nice.
Yep. And
Maybe we could make a few
maybe
extras for like Patreon rewards.
yep. Yeah, let's see how they come out
No. Oh, you
first.
haven't
But
you haven't poured one yet.
I don't even have the models yet. I
Oh, right. You're
just
still
ordered
waiting for
them.
those the
Yeah.
prototypes to come in.
Yep.
All right.
But yeah, I designed a custom form for that. But that's really the way to go because I tried all kinds of things for forms, like using PVC pipe, and they've all got some reason they suck.
Huh.
And I'm just like, well, you know what? If you want a thing that doesn't exist, you have to make it.
Right.
I,
That's
which is
always
a,
your MO. If
I
somebody doesn't
know,
have the
like I'm
thing
not
that
gonna
you
just
want, you just make it.
yeah. And if I can't make it, then I guess I can't have it.
Yeah. You're
You
pretty
know.
crafty
But
though. I mean, you've kind of blown my mind with all this. And this is just one of your many, many hobbies. Damon is quite prolific.
well, I like to have a hobby where I make something. It just especially doing data analysis all day and SQL programming and all that stuff. I mean there is some I like well the way I do it. There's some art to it,
Hmm.
but the thing I really love about the resin pouring is how fucking random it is. I mean, it is absolutely the most random thing I've ever done because you can't, or at least you can just pour one color,
Uh-huh.
right?
You could do that.
Which you could do that. I don't know why anybody would want to do that, but so yeah, the two primary techniques of pouring that I use are I have a silicone cup that is divided up into three sections that all come to the same spigot. And
Uh-huh.
so you put three different colors in there, and like you put some alcohol ink. You fill them all with resin. You put in some alcohol ink or some resin dye, depending on what you're trying to do or how you're trying to do it. And then you add some mica powder and some glitter, and then you literally just pour it in and like circle it around, or you don't circle it around, or and it just makes random patterns and really cool like marbling effects you can get. But also, at this point, I'm pouring a set of dice, and yeah, it started off as three colors, but I've got like almost every single die looks different,
Uh-huh.
you know, and just some of them, some of them are, but some of them are fantastic, and just like I could just stare at them for
Well,
hours because they're just so
that's
cool.
great because they're unique. They're unique art objects.
Right.
They're not just some mass-produced plastic crap. They're like made with loving care by a dude who did a shit ton of research to find out how to do it. People can see pictures if you go to our Instagram, which is at Your Aleatoric Reality. We've posted a bunch of pictures of dice that Damon has made. We will need to take a pic of your dice tower and maybe that cylinder mold you made, or and
Yep.
some of the
Yeah,
silicone molds that we can post in various places.
for sure.
Yeah.
So then the second pouring technique that I started using, which is even more random,
Uh-huh.
is you literally just mix the silicone or not the silicone, the resin, and then you just kind of as you're pouring it, pour alcohol on it,
Oh, neat.
like different colored inks and stuff, and just let it swirl and let it do whatever the hell it wants, and that is even more dramatic. Like the first one was really controlled randomness.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I do have some control over like I have these three colors and they're static. But then when you do it this other way, it's really fucking random.
It sounds kind of
So that's a
like
good time.
some of the noise music you've done, where you have
Yeah,
influence over, but you don't know exactly how it's going to come out.
that's my favorite, man. I mean, that's just, I don't know. There's something about that form of expression where, I think it is. I think it's because I always feel like I hate the humble brag, or like I hate like to talk about how impressed I am by a thing that I did.
I mean, a lot of what you
But
do is impressive. You crow, man.
I, right. So like there's two ways I could feel about it. I could either not talk about it and, let other people tell me how great it is, or I can be honest about it and like because I honestly don't feel like it's something I did. It's something that I staged,
Uh-huh.
but the final product is not a result of my talent. It's just the output of the inputs that I provided.
Well, yeah, but I mean, your talent is in setting up the process and figuring out what leads to better results and what doesn't lead to better results. You've done a lot of
Sure.
experimentation so that you can say within these parameters something cool is going to happen, and then leave the rest to Fortuna.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's beautiful. It's a
And
beautiful thing.
And then the final step. So once you've got all the dice, they come out of the tumbler. You rinse all the crap off of them, all the polish off of them, let them dry, and then you have to paint the numbers.
Uh-huh.
And most people just do black, white, gold. And those are like the three things they choose from, and that's what they go with. And of course, once again, I can't do anything small. So I found a box of paints on Amazon that it was like, well, first of all, the paints that I was using the paints that I had left over from when I used to paint minis.
Is that acrylic?
But they're yeah, it's all water
Hmm.
based. Um, but they were so expensive that it was like because half like what you do is you glop a bunch of paint on the number and then you wipe it off with a tissue,
Uh-huh.
the best you can, and but that you got to really pack it in, and then when it dries the whole number is painted thoroughly. But yeah, what I typically do is I have like a box of 30 different metallic inks,
Hmm.
and there's plenty to choose from, and then I'll grab like 5 or 6 dice, turn them all to number two, and then I'll pick like the colors I think might work and paint the number two on each one, and then I'll look at it, and sometimes I'll solicit advice if I'm getting stuck. But it's really hard to pick the right color paint to contrast the randomness,
Hmm.
because you want the numbers to be very visible and pop, but you also don't want to diminish the interesting that's going on. And there's like a really hard to find happy medium between the
Uh-huh.
two where you can either emphasize the paint or you can emphasize the dye or hopefully a little of
A
both.
nice balance.
Yeah. And then you have to take every single dye and take alcohol, 99% alcohol, and rub them all down and get every little microscopic flake of paint that was embedded in the process
Off the
off all the
sides so
faces.
they're
And
not.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're finally done and you have some dice.
Amazing.
But I also started buying like button molds
Hmm. For
because
buttons.
I always, yeah, yeah, like so, like on your shirt.
Yeah.
So you can get, and then because what ends up happening is you don't, I tried to do the math and know exactly how much resin I needed to do a set of dice, or so I tried that, and I just always came up short when I tried to be precise.
Hmm.
And then otherwise I had extra. So at first I just had this set of little skull face ice cube molds
Uh-huh.
that I just had, and I started using that as my dump mold. So whatever's left over, you just dump in there,
Hmm.
right? Or like if you're doing a color set, because inevitably there's like a bottom of the bottle kind of
Uh-huh.
thing, and I just dump it in there, and then I start going, well, that's cool, but I'm like, let me get some other things. So now I have all these like jewelry molds and beads and buttons, Zardoz heads. Um,
Yeah, you ventured way
the
outside of dice, making all kinds of stuff over there.
Oh, did I show you the keychains?
No. Another thing we'll have to take a picture of to show our listeners. Is that a little skull head?
Yeah, so the skull head that I was using as dumps,
That's awesome.
I was like, well, how do I make this a thing, right? Because it's too big for a necklace,
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, let me try fucking around with keychains.
And now it's a skull keychain.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
I got this little engraver battery powered drill, and it's makes almost no
Uh-huh.
noise. So during my work meetings,
Good thing you know how to multitask.
yep, yep. Oh, another one that I did that's kind of cool that we could talk about is these CMY cubes.
Hmm.
So yeah, I saw I don't know if you ever or our listeners have ever seen a CMY cube, but it's cyan, magenta, and yellow, and it's called subtracting color mixing.
Hmm.
And so when you look through one color at the other, it subtracts the frequencies of that color and creates a color.
Yeah.
And so, I made some blanks, which is a slightly smaller, it's the same shape as the die is supposed to be, but shrunk by the size of the depth of the numbers and a little bit of slop room there. And then, but with no number on it. And so I make these guys, and then I have these markers, these paint markers that are for glass,
Uh-huh.
transparent for glass, and then I color each side with magenta, yellow, or blue, or blue. It's just blue, but it should be cyan, but it's fine. And then you take that, and then when you pour the D6, you put a little bit of clear resin in the mold. Then you take the blank and you stick it in, and then you fill it up with clear resin, and then you have this kind of cube inside of a cube thing. And so anyway, that's fun.
Right on.
Yep.
Well, it is a amazing craft that you were doing, and like I said, people can go on our Instagram and see your works and despair. And we need to issue a listener challenge. And I have one that has absolutely nothing to do with dice making. If you
That's
have
fine.
one for dice making, I mean, I don't think a lot of people are going to go out and buy all the stuff that you bought and watch the thousands of videos you watched and actually do dice making. So I don't think we can
Hmm.
issue that as a challenge. But one that I
Well,
have done before.
I've got one related to that, and that's just go on Etsy and take a look at some of the custom dice that people are making.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because I'm not going to bother to try to sell my stuff on Etsy because that is a flooded market.
Right.
But there's a lot of really beautiful work that people are doing as their side hustle, and yeah, go check
Yeah.
some of that out.
Get yourself some random dice. Support local, well, not local to you, but local somewhere. Independent artists,
Hmm.
doing their thing. Find some dice. Make yourself a list of a few ones that you like and roll for which one you should get. I like that. That's a good one.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Do it
I mean, they're
too.
more expensive. You'll end up paying like $45 for a set of polyhedrons.
Oh, a lot of people aren't going to do that, but some people will.
But I'm just saying, go check them
Yeah,
out.
go check them out. That's not a random task really, unless you roll for which one you're going to get.
Well, I'm not telling them who to look at.
True enough.
Yeah.
You
But go
get to
ahead
make
with
you get
what
to
you were
make
going
your
to
own
say.
list with options that are acceptable to you.
Right.
You could put chess X on the list and say, you know what, I'm a cheapskate. I'm gonna order prefab mass market dice.
Well, that's one of the things that sucks is I have all these prefab mass market dice that I literally don't even want anymore
Maybe you should
because
do
they're
an
just
Etsy store of that.
inferior.
Buy my old dice that I don't want.
I still have, I was always going to do that when I started making guitar pedals. It was like, oh, I'll sell off all my old guitar pedals, but I never really managed to do that
Uh,
either. So,
all right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Tell a friend, give us a good review, and I will end with a random quote. In the dance of life, embrace the rhythm of uncertainty. That's a pretty Fortuna relevant quote that I picked out of a random quote thing.
cool.
So there you go.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Peace out, everybody.